Hello, my name's Anthony Condon and I'm going to show you how to use the NVivo method to do a quantitative analysis of language in text files over time. Now there's probably quite a number of different methods, different projects you could apply this method to, but what I am doing is I am looking at a series of around about 100,000 newspaper articles printed in Australia between 1912 and 1920, cricket articles, and I'm looking at those to examine how the World War One changed language around aggression and military and that kind of thing. But there's many different ways you could use this method. So what we're going to do is we're going to start a blank project, and I'm going to call this the referee post war. And you might see up here, there's already one called referee post-war, but I've moved that because this is the second time I've tried to record this video because the audio was ruined. So I go into here and the referee and new folder. Now, I have some very specific rules that I use when I'm naming things. Because I do my graphing in MATLAB, it's really important to keep file names and file hierarchies really stable. Otherwise, MATLAB will just spit a fit at you. Even if you're not using MATLAB, this is just good practice. So you can see here I have some of the newspapers that I've done, and then into 3 sections. Now, the reason I'm breaking up my newspapers into 3 sections is because that once a project reaches around about 4 gigabytes, so it's about 10,000 text articles from newspapers that gets you there. And I found NVivo really struggles to work with that. And there's also some file systems just won't support files that big, so you're going to run into problems if you have a file over 4 gigabyte and you're using one of those file systems on your hard drive. Now, I also have a few different things that I do. So you see here I've got post space war. Later on I will be using one that's post no space war, and this just helps me to identify that I'm doing things in the right spot, and this is in the right spot. So there is post war. So referee post war, let's save that there. Now I like to put in here just a little description of what I'm doing. This is probably unnecessary. However, I did find that one time, what am I going from? December 1918 to December 1920. One time I actually wrote in July instead of June in one of these, and that's what triggered me that I was about to do the wrong thing. And so I just kept doing this because it helps me just make sure I do things correctly. Okay, so there's a few things that I like to do before I add my data in, and that is just to create my node folders. These will become apparent what I'm doing these for later. And there's no need to be doing this first, it just helps me feel better that I go and set up a few little things. The second thing I set up is the source classifications. Getting this right is really important, and this was actually the trickiest thing for me to work out in doing this. So what these source classifications are going to become is the dates of, it's going to become the date, and so this will be my discrete x-axis points going along. So I'm using the date, and then I need a new attribute, which I just call month, year. And the type I change to date. Now, if you're familiar with Excel and the format cells, this is essentially the same. So if you have it in here, when you output your CSV file, if you open that in Excel, it will be formatted in this format. So I use date because it's the date. However, I just did that because that's the way I got it working to start with, and once I got this working, I didn't want to adjust anything. But I think maybe text might have been easier because I just need, month 1, month 2, month 3. I'm not actually really worried about dates. I made this a little bit more difficult for myself by trying to use a date format because MATLAB handles dates really weirdly. It's something like the number of days after the 1st of January 1900, which it's not weird for computer people, but it's weird for the rest of us. And you can code around that in MATLAB, but that wasn't that easy, I found. And then in the end, it hasn't mattered. I've made a few little things harder for me by having date, but it hasn't really mattered. I probably would use text in the future. The values here, that doesn't matter either. Now, the next thing that I need to do is to add my data. So we'll go up to Data, we'll go to Documents, and keep my data in my Documents, and in here, NVivo, Data. And here you can see all the newspapers that I have done so far. Text. And all of these I've downloaded off Trove using a great little widget called the Trove Harvester by Tim Sherritt, and I'll post a link to that below. And Tim's got a whole bunch of little great tools to get into Trove and also some New Zealand archives and some other Australian archives, and just to get data out that you can then use in your big data or your digital humanities projects. One of the great things about it is you can see it comes downloaded 1912-01-03. So this is the 3rd of January 1912. So everything's all in date order, which is very, very useful for this project. Now, because this is my last one, I'll jump down to the end, 1920. And then I need right through December 1918 is when I'm starting. It's that one there. And I'll open that. So normally when you import stuff into NVivo, you'll get something here. Don't worry that it's not there, it's just because there's so many files. So while this will take a little bit of time to load. This is one of the smaller projects, so this one's not too bad. So the reason why I'm using Trove articles, and this project actually looks at South Africa and England as well, but I can't do this with those data sets, with those sources, because Trove has some really great little tools that allow you to get in and download tens of thousands of articles at once in a text format that you can then pop into a program like NVivo. In South Africa, this period they haven't even begun digitizing, and then in England it's all handled by a private company who, although they'll let me download individual articles, they won't give me access to do mass downloads, and it's just not feasible to take a couple of clicks to download a text file of a newspaper article when you have to do it 100,000 times. So big thanks to Trove and the National Archives of Australia for their excellent products in keeping things open access. So just while this loads, I will just fast forward through. Okay, so we're all loaded up now. So if we jump into sources, and you can see down here, that's 1,685 articles. So this is a nice small one, so this will all load and run fairly well. So the first thing to do is to add in that source classification. I really wish I could work out how to do this on loading, but you can only add case classifications on loading, and I can't work out how to make that do the output, the file that we need at the end. So we're going to add a classification, and we're going to add date. And now we'll have to wait for this to work, so I will again fast forward. Okay, so now all of our files have a date classification. No, I won't save it. So what we need to do now is to export that classification sheet so we can go in and put the individual elements in. Now I could do this through going to classification, going through to the classification sheet, and I can assign values here if I already add them in, but that would mean click down for 1,600 articles, and that's not going to happen. So what we can do is we can export it all out into an Excel file and do it in Excel. So we need to click on there, and then we can export the classification sheet. So I go through to my folder and I save it there. Now, because I'm using an individual folder for each one, I don't even bother changing that name. Now, this is important. This needs to be name and not hierarchical. I wasn't able to get it work if I tried to do hierarchical, so okay. And then let's open that in let me jump across and we can open that up in Excel. And this is one of the things that I think I could find a much more efficient method of doing, because I actually enter these manually. Now, there should be a way that I can get Excel to take that number and turn it into a date, but I haven't been able to work that out. But if you know how to do that, let me know, because that would be really useful. So what I do is I always just go from the first of the month, because I'm just going month by month. But obviously, if you wanted to do the exact day, you'd have to have the exact day. So 1918. And then I go down and fill this out for all of them. So I will do that and fast forward the video. And then it's just a matter of grabbing each one and sliding it down until I hit the next one, and then copy those cells. And there you go, you can see it's all filled out for me. So I'll just go through and complete these. Now, one of the things I like about having to be so involved here is that I get to check through the data. And there's a few points in this process where I do things that might be a little bit unnecessary, but it gets me a little bit closer to the data. And being close to the data is nice. You can find some patterns that you may not even think to look for. But also, you just gives you an opportunity to just be constantly double checking that you've done things correctly. Although, if I could automate this, there'd be a much lower chance of making mistakes, because this is actually the point where I've made the most mistakes. The number of times where I have come past, and so gone past that date and missed an entire month. See, I missed 7 and 8 there, and not noticed it until I'm right at the end and I've done everything, and then I have to go back and redo this part of it all again. So I like to just go back through and check my work on this, and I actually check it in a few other places as well when I'm doing some of the other coding. So I'll just finish filling these out. You can see there, classic mistake. And so now, before I save this, I'm just going to run up and make sure that I've got every month I want. So 12, 11, 10. Okay, great. Now, sometimes there won't be any articles in a month. So this was particularly true of the smaller rural newspapers in the middle of outside the cricket season. Now, if I just left everything as is, what I'm going to end up is when I output it, I'm going to have months missing. And so it's going to shift the graph and create a whole big problem. It'll put everything out by a couple of months. So in those cases, what I did is I just inserted a new cell, and I went in and I made a fake file name, just using the month, and gave it the month. So there's one where I have to have like 3 months in a row that are all fake. And that worked fine, it seems. So we'll save that, close that, Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to import the source classifications. So we just go in here, we'll import the classification sheets and browse. We need to find the correct folder. There's my classification sheet, open that. Next. Now, it's what we do here is really important. If you don't follow this part exactly, then it's probably not going to work. So the first thing we need to check is, okay, we've got source classifications, and that's what we're doing. Now, I don't want to create new attributes if they do not exist. And this is because if I've done something in the Excel file that's added a bit of, just a little bit of a mistake somewhere, there's a chance that it could then come in and be imported into the project and end up upsetting everything. I do want to update the classification of the existing sources and replace the attribute values of existing sources or cases that appear in this file though. And now this is the important thing. As names, select internals. Internals being documents you've loaded into NVivo, externals being documents that you have outside of NVivo. Not hierarchical names, I couldn't get that to work. Now, I want to untick create new sources if they do not exist for that very same reason that if I've made a mistake in the Excel file, I don't want it to upset in here. The one exception to that, of course, is when I had to create the fake months, then I did want to create the new sources if they do not exist. And I don't have to worry about any of this. This is all fine, so we finish. And we just have to give that a little bit of time to load in. And here we go. So you can see here now each of my articles has their month assigned to them. So like I said before, these are going to become our x-axes. Now, the next thing to do is to go in and do our text searching. Oh, actually, before I do that, I like to do a word frequency search first. So this will look for the most frequent words that are used, and I only bother looking for the most 300, and just exact, because these ones will take quite some time. So what I do with this is I then go through and have a look, are there any of these words that aren't words? Is it picking up junk? And you can see here there's ing, the suffix. This is actually a really common one. So the way we make it so that NVivo doesn't read this is we go into the project properties from the files tab and add in a stop word. We just add in ing, okay. And we run the query again, and now it won't have the ing in it. Now for this project, this probably doesn't make any difference because I'm not looking at a rate of uses as a total. I'm not looking for my words as a total of all words. I'm looking for my words as a total of all articles. So these words in each article doesn't matter, but this is probably something to keep in mind if you're going to look at a proportion of words used as a proportion of a total words. So you want to get that right. There's probably a few little things you'd need to fiddle around with to get that running well. Now, the other thing I like to do here is just to export my word cloud and the referee post-war. So I'm going to call this, it's the same as the NVivo file I used, just delete that. It's 3 because it's 3, minimum word length of 3 words, 300 words, and it's a word cloud. Not even 100% sure what I'm going to use these for yet. It's just, they're here. I may as well generate it and save it. As I've said at other times, word clouds are useless except for being pretty little pictures to have in your conference presentations and stuff like that. So now we have all our data coded in. Now we have all our data loaded in and classified. We can go ahead and do our text searches, but I'll come back and show you that in the next video.